Somewhere on a dark Appalachian road, in the first minutes of New Year's Day 1953, the greatest country music singer who ever lived took his last breath. Nobody heard it happen. Nobody saw it happen. And the 17-year-old boy behind the wheel, exhausted and scared, drove on through the mountains for hours because he didn't know, or because he did know and wasn't ready to stop. The question of whether Charles Carr knew Hank Williams was already dead before he pulled into that Oak Hill gas station is one nobody in country music has ever fully answered. Because there were 2 gas station stops that night, 2 attendants who saw the body, and only one version of events that Charles Carr ever allowed to become the official story. To understand what happened in that car, you have to understand what state Hank Williams was already in before the ride even began. By the end of 1952, Williams had been fired from the Grand Ole Opry, the institution he had joined in 1949, to 6 encores. The first performer in Opry history to receive that many fired because the drinking and the missed shows had finally exhausted the patience of manager Jim Denny, who meant it as a warning and never got the chance to take it back. His MGM movie contract was canceled that same summer. His divorce from Audrey, his second divorce from the same woman, was finalized. His ex-wife was keeping Hank Jr. from him. And his back, which had been broken since birth by a spinal condition called spina bifida occulta that nobody had properly diagnosed until it was too late to treat, had deteriorated to the point where he was being prescribed chloral hydrate, morphine, and amphetamines simultaneously by a man named Toby Marshall, who was not actually a doctor. Marshall had purchased his credentials for $35 from a Chicago diploma mill and had been released from the Oklahoma State Penitentiary on a forgery conviction just 1 year earlier. Hank Williams was 29 years old, and his pain management was in the hands of a convicted forger who called himself a doctor of science and psychology. His final public performance was a Christmas benefit for musicians on December 28, 1952, at the Elite Cafe in Montgomery. He sang Jambalaya, Cold Cold Heart, You Win Again, and Lovesick Blues. 3 days later, he was dead. On December 30th, 1952, because an ice storm had grounded all flights out of Nashville, Williams hired Charles Carr, the 17-year-old son of a local taxi company owner, a freshman home from Auburn University on Christmas break, to drive his baby blue Cadillac from Montgomery, Alabama to Canton, Ohio, where a New Year's Day concert was waiting. Williams rode in the back seat, stretched out to relieve the pressure on his spine, consuming chloral hydrate capsules and beer throughout the trip, while Carr navigated icy roads through the night. They reached Knoxville, Tennessee on the evening of December 31st, checking into the Andrew Johnson Hotel at 7:08 in the evening. Williams was badly deteriorated, hiccuping uncontrollably, unable to eat, in visible pain. Carr called a doctor to the room. That doctor injected Williams with both B12 and morphine to calm his body down. And here is the detail that most accounts skip over. When they checked out of that hotel later that night to continue the drive, hotel porters had to carry Hank Williams to the car. He could not walk on his own. He was placed in the back seat of the Cadillac, unconscious or near it, and the 17-year-old college student pointed the car north into the Appalachian darkness. In Bristol, Virginia, just past the Tennessee state line, Carr stopped at an all-night diner and asked Williams if he wanted something to eat. Williams said no. Those are believed to be the last words he ever spoke. By this point, exhausted from nearly 24 hours of continuous driving, Carr struck a deal with a cab driver named Don Surface at the diner, $50, and a bus ticket home in exchange for taking the wheel. The 3 of them continued north. Somewhere in those dark Appalachian miles, between Bristol and Oak Hill, Hank Williams died. Charles Carr's official account was this. He reached the Skyline Drive-In in Oak Hill, noticed that the blanket covering Williams in the back seat had slipped off, reached back to pull it up, felt unnatural resistance from his arm, and understood something was wrong. He told the station attendant he needed a hospital. The attendant pointed him 6 miles up the road to Oak Hill General Hospital, and Carr drove there. The interns came out, looked at Hank, and told Carr he was dead. That is the version Carr repeated for the rest of his life, in every interview from 1953 until his death in 2013. But there was another stop before Oak Hill, a gas station attendant at an earlier station, not the Skyline Drive-In, a different stop before it later told investigators that he had looked into the back seat of that Cadillac and told Carr directly, "You have a problem back there." Never mentioned that attendant, never mentioned being told, before Oak Hill, before the Skyline Drive-In, before any of the official timeline, that the man in the back seat was not asleep. There was also an interaction at Oak Hill Hospital itself that Carr omitted. A doctor there recalled that Carr approached him separately before the interns examined Williams, acting, by the doctor's description, extremely nervous and distraught, nervous enough that the doctor later said he had briefly considered whether Carr had played some role in what happened. Carr was never charged with anything. The coroner's conclusion was cardiac failure, acute right ventricular dilation, consistent with the combination of morphine, chloral hydrate, and alcohol that Williams had consumed across 2 days. There was no criminal investigation, but the 2 stops he didn't mention, the attendant he never acknowledged, and the doctor he never brought up those details, stayed out of every version of the story Carr ever told publicly. When police examined the back seat of that baby blue Cadillac in Oak Hill on New Year's morning, they found empty beer cans, a nearly finished prescription bottle of chloral hydrate, and a piece of paper that had been crumpled on the floor. On that paper, in Hank Williams' handwriting, were the last words he ever wrote. Not a finished song, not a complete thought, just a fragment written somewhere in the dark between Bristol and Oak Hill on the last night of his life. We met, we lived, and dear we loved. Then comes that fatal day. The love that felt so dear fades far away. Tonight so alone and lonesome. I love you still and always will, but that's the price we have to pay. That piece of paper sat in a briefcase for more than 50 years. In 2006, a custodian at Sony Music found a notebook of Williams's unfinished lyrics in a dumpster. Bob Dylan spent over a year going through those fragments before deciding the task was too large even for him. The Lost Notebooks of Hank Williams was eventually released in 2011, nearly 60 years after he wrote those last words in the back of that car. Hank Williams was 29 years old. He had been fired from the institution he loved most, divorced twice from the same woman, stripped of his movie contract, and handed his medication by a convicted forger. He was being driven through a January ice storm by a 17-year-old college student who had never met him before that week. Charles Carr carried what he knew about that night for 60 years. He died in 2013 at 77, and whatever he left out of the official account died with him. What remains is a plaque in Oak Hill, a grave in Montgomery, and a crumpled piece of paper with the last thing Hank Williams ever wrote, a song that never got finished, by a man who ran out of road before he could finish it. That paper is now in an archive, the Cadillac is in a museum, and the Skyline Drive-In in Oak Hill, where Charles Carr finally stopped and told someone something was wrong, still stands today. Locals call it Hank's Last Stop. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, the ones that happened in the dark, on the back roads, that never quite made it into the version history decided to remember.